Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be part of this conversation today. And my answer to the question posed to this panel is in the title of my presentation. And I mean precisely what it says, that the final cause of the Eurozone crisis is that there is not enough debt or credit, as you may call it. So in my time today, I will explain why neither fiscal profligacy or capital flows provide a full account of the cause of the crisis, and I will offer a rather different interpretation that builds upon a critique of the notion of savings of well-established orthodox analysis. In our discipline, beliefs that are considered today well-established and orthodox are not always the best-known answers of the time. So this would be also an attempt to provoke new economic thinking, as the INET mission advocates, and to contribute to what George Soros calls the constructive phase of INET. So we should move from the classics, an activity that is less pursued today with the downgrading of the history of the economic thought course to an optional course in university economics curricula. So today I'm seeking guidance from Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes. From Smith, I'm taking the notion that prosperity of a nation depends ultimately not on its financial wealth, but on its capacity to provide necessities and conveniences of life to its people. So I'm taking from Smith the ultimate objective of public policy being that of promoting the full use of labor resources towards real wealth. And from Keynes, I'm taking the notion that real outcomes are shaped by monetary decisions because people care about financial stocks and monetary flows. And so I let Smith set in the goal, the real welfare of the nation, prosperity, output and labor, and Keynes setting the instrument, removing the monetary and financial impediments to real prosperity. Contemporary macroeconomics seems to be skewed towards a vision where people only care of real interest rates, real returns. People who care of nominal values are considered irrational. And considering Smith's recognition of money as a wheel of commerce, these models seem to me to be plus royaliste que le roi, more Smithian than Adam Smith himself. But let's move on to Europe. Why we continue to worry of the Eurozone crisis? Most people connect this to the government debt crisis that occurred in the aftermath of the Lehman collapse and peaked in 2012 with Draghi's OMT and is now fading away. We see the full cycle of the crisis. Behind this, there was both high accumulated debt and capital flights. But this shows what many people seem to fully recognize today, that by entering the Eurozone, countries had permanently lost access to central bank money, and this created the conditions for credit concerns and liquidity runs within the monetary union itself. In an article that was published a couple of months after OMT in the ECB working paper, Binzeil and Winkler parallel the crisis in the Eurozone to the German banking crisis of the 1930s, and they say that the final cause of that crisis, which brought to ruin the German state and civil society, was one, draconian austerity, and two, the Reichsbank being forbidden from buying government bonds. It was published a couple of months after OMT. But let me also put in another hopefully effective way that a country that loses access to central bank money and becomes credit constrained can only support internal demand through bank lending and private debt. At the same time, a country losing access to central bank money can only avoid running out of euros by generating a surplus in the current account. Kind of conflicting strategies. So what happened is simple. Some countries went in one direction, and some other countries went in the other direction. Those who expanded debt fared relatively better before the crisis, at which point it was the others that fared better. But the big picture of divergence, imbalance issue in the Eurozone is rooted here. Countries' divergence brings, of course, to the governance crisis. There is an ongoing discussion and transition from rules-based governance to institution-based governance. Draghi has talked about constrained discretion as the next step, which I think is a good idea, but the big question is to do what? Because more fundamentally, we all continue to worry about a euro crisis because of this. 14 largest economies, growth rates, the euro area is a drag on and a threat to the world economy. I don't think I need to convince you of this. And yes, there are regional differences within the Union, as are in any monetary union, within the UK, within the US, within Germany, there are differences. But stagnation exacerbates those differences within the Union. And nothing is happening. Well, this is the double dip recession. If you want to compare the Eurozone with the US, this double dip recession of the Eurozone, and nothing is really happening. This is borrowed from a presentation of the OECD chief economist that eloquently describes the frustration of forecasters when it comes to Europe. So I think I don't need to spend much time on the fiscal profligacy, because we seem to be in agreement that the large deficits were not a cause. But also we should remember what every economist knows, that the cyclical, the budget deficits is largely endogenous. This is the U.S., but this is Europe before the crisis. And what happened with austerity was the decoupling, pushing down the deficits, enforcing this reduction, which is not longer cyclical, and pushing unemployment up. So profligacy can be better seen as the public debt overhang that restricted the fiscal space of nations. But the next question is, what makes debt high? Markets have credit concerns, not numbers. And as the full cycle of the debt crisis that we've seen before shows. So the fact is that in Europe, debt is high when the rules of the European Union say so. More than profligacy, I see a lot of fiscal negligence of governments, things like poor quality control of government spending, lack of enforcement tax system, poor public infrastructure. This is fiscal negligence, which is very insidious because it doesn't necessarily show up in the deficits. And corruption and bad spending live well under balanced budget rules. So what does Europe need to do now? What final causes need to be removed to reclaim the economic strength of the continent and provide the necessary condition following Keynes for growth? Every professional forecaster knows that growth forecast depends on expectations of growth of demand in different sectors. The disagreement is about where demand should be coming from, and what demand is sustainable, how demand should be financed. One reason why demand should not come from government deficits is it's been argued that this absorbs personal savings. So we need to move into the discussion of savings, because this is really crucial. Textbooks make a lot of confusion on savings. In the neoclassical growth chapter, they say savings are good. In the business cycle Keynesian chapter, they say savings are bad. And some economists warn us about savings glut, and the next moment about a savings shortage. So I come to my final 3 points. What savings are not. Current orthodoxy defines savings as a source of finance for investment, for government debt, usable towards capital flows. In my humble opinion, this is the next concept that INET should help demolish. Personal savings are presented to us as the difference between after-tax income and consumption spending. They call it this personal savings. You can call it Zippo, but the fact is that this number in national accounts is the value added in the production of investment goods. So it's a real savings. And in fact, I think that the narrative of saving being a source of funds suits only a non-monetary economy where saving is a real resource. Because when people save as a real commodity like corn, the decision to save is fully personal matter. You may decide to consume it, store it, waste it as you please without directly affecting other people's consumption of corn. Only if you decide to lend it, you establish a relationship with others. So my second point is what savings are in a monetary economy. There's something very different. They are a relation so personal saving is not what you think, okay? And financial saving is an act that reflects on others. It's always asset and liability. Of every penny of behind every penny of savings, there is a penny of debt, and so savings do not fund anything. They seek funding. You need to fund your savings. This completely breaks the narrative of financial savings as a source of funds available for investment. And the question to be asked is not whether savings are good or bad, but can people fund the savings that they want to accumulate? Financial savings don't add to a positive number, they add to zero. In the whole world, if you add up the personal savings, you get a positive number because you're adding investment spending, investment production, really. And if you add up the financial savings, you get zero. This is the Eurozone only, but it's a full accounting system with the foreign sector built in. You get the colors in a moment. I just want to make the point that the credits and debits are, of course, add to zero. I have no time to go into the specifics of the different sectors here, but you see here again the cyclical correlation between the government deficit, which is the dark green, which is supporting the savings on the upper side. And the other thing that is supporting the savings is private debt, which is the light green. And you see the cycles up to 2010. And after 2010, you see the public debt forced down faster than the private sector was prepared to accept. So the double dip recession that we saw earlier can be described as a saving and debt shortage recession in the Eurozone. And if I can go back, yes, the yellow lines on the most recent period are the fortunate conditions that Professor Sin talked about that support the savings thanks to the current account surplus. How long this will last, we'll see. But so textbooks ask, are savings good or bad? But this is not the question to ask. The question really, as I said, is can people fund the savings that they really desire to accumulate? And we should move away from the conflict between neoclassical models pro savings and Keynesian models pro consumption. When people cannot fund their private savings, spenders are simply not happy and with their current savings, and the economy goes south. So this takes me to my last point. Physicists say that a theory of the universe is not credible if it cannot be condensed on a T-shirt. So this is my T-shirt model of job creation. And the first says that jobs increase when private agents think they have more savings than needed, which leads to spending. The second tells us that private agents know better than anybody else what their savings needs are. And the third is this accounting truth that gross private savings must equal the private debt, the government debt, and the foreigner's debt. So this describes the endogeneity of government deficits during a recession, where the only way to keep the gross savings constant with deleveraging is an expansion of government debt. And this is what happens when you put a cap on government debt and you have deleveraging and you're not lucky on the foreign front, and the gross savings are downsized in a debt shortage recession. What are the options for a situation where the debt available is not enough to fund the savings that people desire? If you put a cap on DG, on government debt, you only have two options. Either you accept an increase in private debt, or you hope for an increase in foreigners' debt. The EU is telling the world, in other words, that they intend to support growth with private debt and the debt of the others, without taking responsibility for its own ambitious project, which is the Economic and Monetary Union. And this is not the way in which Europe may survive in the long run. Thank you very much.
Andrea, thank you very much. That was a very interesting focus on, some fundamental issues of theory. And I guess the final message at the end was that if we attempt simultaneous private deleveraging and public deleveraging, we are bound to have a shortage of demand, to which the answer is either, as you say, current account surpluses or a re-expansion of private debt, or for governments themselves to run higher debt levels. I'm struck in the UK, I mentioned this yesterday, by if you look at the forecasts for the UK economy, which our Office of Budget Responsibilities says will develop quite well over the next 5 years, that growth, they say, will only occur if there is an expansion of private debt. Indeed, there is a graph which clearly shows that what has happened for the last 4 years is some deleveraging of the private sector offset by a more than offsetting increase in public debt. And then what they forecast for the next 5 years is the complete inversion of that the public debt will begin to come down because of our fiscal consolidation program, but that is only compatible with a rapid rate of growth if the private debt returns to a higher than the levels of leverage which existed in 2007. So UK official growth forecasts are based upon a re-expansion of private debt to levels in excess of that. I guess where I would question is that a stable long-term thing, or don't we have to find some way where we can grow our economies without a relentless increase in leverage, either public or private debt? Well, let's have a discussion now. One thing that struck me going through the various very insightful presentations is that there may actually be far more agreement on the causes of the crisis than what we now do. Because actually, as between Servas and Hans Werner, although I think a lot of people would be perceiving that they are saying different things in terms of the policy reaction, there was a relatively common story that there had been a lot of capital flows which were not going into new productive investment which improved the productive capacity of the lower income countries, but instead went into various bubbles. Both of them, I think, were saying that the fundamental reason for the divergence of unit labour costs was driven by the bubbles rather than the other way round. That was what I think Hans Werner said, and you said, Servus, that it's not that the unit labour costs went up and therefore there was a current account deficit. It's more that there were capital inflows, property and real estate bubbles, at least in Spain and Ireland, and then a unit labour cost problem. I think what also came out of the debate is a diversity between different countries. I think the story is different in Greece, where there is more of an argument that the problems start on the public sector and increases in public sector pay that then refer over to the traded sectors of the economy, whereas undoubtedly in Spain and Ireland it derived initially in the private sector and then extended to the public sector through the post-crisis response. What I think is interesting, though, is even if you agree how we got to this position, you can still disagree about what we do about it. Even if you think that most of the public debt derived initially on the private side and moved to the public side, you can still argue either for or against fiscal austerity, and there are different points of view there. And even if you agree that the fundamental driver was from capital flows to unit labour costs rather than unit labour costs to capital flows, you can still disagree as to whether a programme of reducing unit labour costs by internal devaluation is a good or a bad thing. And then, of course, Domenico reminded us that there are some very important structural issues there as well.